Hello, everyone. I'm Scott Logan, the CMO of AmplifAI, and welcome to the last but by far the not least session of AmplifAI's AI for CX Virtual Summit, where we bring you some of the best and latest insights and best practices around AI and the customer experience. At AmplifAI, we unify data from your structured and unstructured sources, voice, chat, email, virtual agents, CRM, back-of-house applications, whatever you have into a single view of performance. With this one view of your data, Amplify delivers role-specific insights and AI-recommended next best actions from auto QA to AI-powered coaching, performance, and gamification. Over 10,000 teams worldwide use Amplify to boost productivity, improve customer experiences, and drive better results in sales, support, collections, healthcare, you name it. So we'll provide a link to a landing page with a recording in the days following the webinar. There'll be a blog summary for it, the works. And for this session, we'll answer your questions at the end, but please do chat them into the chat or using the Q&A function, and we definitely will get to them. With that, let's get started. In this interview session titled AI Ready, Unlock Business Value with Intelligent Data Strategies, where Chris Moffett, an executive leader at Cloud Communications Group, will be interviewing Mike Stute, CISO and AI research lead at CCG as well. So for Chris, he has more than 25 years in the technology industry, overseeing both operations and strategic business development activities. Past experience includes senior leadership roles in networking and solutions engineering for customer retention and strategic planning for technology providers. And Mike has been a data scientist before the term existed. I don't know if you want to date yourself that much, Mike, but here we're going to put a number on it. He's been doing research on information security for more than 30 years and is an expert in advanced machine learning, or what we're now just calling AI, especially applies to data analytics and information security.
Scott, thanks to you and the Amplify team for setting it up, and everybody appreciate your time this afternoon. As we get into it, Mike, maybe you want to add a little bit of elaboration on kind of what you've been doing in research in AI and data and what's got us to this point so far?
Yeah, sure. I actually have patents that I've done. I have 9 patents over my years. And I started doing machine learning back when we were mostly involved more in security. And I created a cybersecurity practice around machine learning. I actually created the first behavioral intrusion detection system back then. And have been moving forward with it for a long time, keeping up with technology. And I feel like the rest of the world is caught up to kind of where a lot of us had the vision in the past. That is where I find myself today in this world that we're calling AI. Very advanced machine learning, some pretty amazing stuff that's going on today.
Fantastic. Let's do our own little research project here and launch a poll to get us started and just see where everyone is standing for getting your data AI ready. Are you ready to rock? Maybe, and it's a work in progress, or nope, call in an SOS. This is why we're at this session.
Yeah, absolutely. And the timing's great. We've got on our side quite a few clients that are going through data exercises right now. They're cleaning, preparing, looking at structured versus unstructured.
Yeah, definitely. There's a certain myth that you just have to certainly handle unstructured data better. But whether I need it cleaned or prepared, that's different. And you do. It's an important part of any AI project.
We have more than I thought that are ready to rock, and they're already doing projects with it. A work in progress is where I thought most people would land, and those who are lost will find some guiding light here. Maybe I'll hijack your interview here, Chris, with the first question that came in. Assuming you'll describe what AI ready means. Now, if you're going to address that later on, absolutely, but that is one of the first questions that is come in because I think that is one of the key points to we don't even know what we don't know, maybe.
And I think a lot of people find themselves in that situation. Some people make this mistake that it's just about the volume of the data. And you do need a lot of data to actually do a really good training run in AI. But it's actually more about how accurate your data is and how consistent that it is. As I mentioned, it may not have to be as structured as we're used to. You don't have to have tables and columns for everything, but it definitely needs to be consistent across your data set, and it needs to be complete because the data that you're going to give it is exactly what it's going to give back to you. So if you start out and it's not prepared properly, you're inconsistent and it's not clean, then that's what you're going to get back.
Absolutely. So why is that data readiness such a big hurdle in adopting AI, even sometimes before picking the right AI tool set?
AI algorithms follow the principle that we've had for a long time, which is the good old garbage in, garbage out. If you give it bad data when you're training it and setting it up, then you're going to get bad data on the backside. So good old GIGO, as it's called. And so, of course, these are algorithms, and all algorithms are only as good as the data that they can process. If you have poor data quality, then you're also going to end up with inaccurate and poor data results. You got to remember that models are actually learning the data, and they're learning the different aspects of your data. A lot of times they're learning patterns maybe that you don't even know exist in that data. But all of that is important for it to be able to make those connections and be able to embed that data in its learning process. It has to be, a clean situation. So a lot of organizations go into this and they think it's really more about collecting our data and getting it in one spot, when in reality, there's going to be a very large effort required to get the data into the shape that you need it in. And if you start your project early and your data is not clean, then you're going to end up delaying it. You're possibly even derailing it because you're not going to get the results that you want.
Okay. So I've heard the term recently, data silos. Maybe start off first, what is a data silo and how does that affect AI initiatives?
You have to have some sort of data governance in place that determines what your data is, who's allowed to see it. Those are the pieces that are very often part of data governance. And then silos would be those, that's kind of not really imaginary. I guess they are. They're an imaginary vertical partition within your company. So maybe it's geographical. Maybe you have an East Coast and a West Coast division, and they each have their own sets of data and they don't share. Or maybe they have a certain set of data. They're saying, this is outside the realm of the global company. This is only our regional that gets to see this. And if that's not included actually in the data set, then that's actually a silo that gets in the way. It's not just necessarily where it resides, but it's also what data exists across the organization that is consistently. And then the next question is, where does it reside? And then the last question is, what are we going to focus on when we want to integrate all that data to one place? So whether it be geographical, or whether it be hierarchical, or whether it be regional across the world or something like that, you're going to need it all in one place and consistent across all the organization for that. And so those silos kind of are the first, really have to break those down to get the data.
I got you. So given that we kind of understand data readiness is critical, what can an organization do to assess their current level of data readiness?
The first thing is you have to determine exactly how mature is your data, and so that you can just do a maturity assessment across it. So the very first thing you can do is, when you're coming up with your AI projects, you're going to have some things you can hit pretty quickly. So the first thing to do is look at your data, as we talked about, across your regions and your divisions, and find out what are the standard formats that you already have. And a lot of companies have these. They end up, then next step would be, say, removing your duplicate records. Very often we may have two different data stores, maybe the East Coast, West Coast was an example. And they actually do end up having data duplicate records, so you need to clean those as first. So I would recommend you really start hitting on those simple ones first. Focus on the quick wins that you have that you can easily demonstrate the value and build some momentum. Because if you try to ingest it all and do it all at once, and you don't have those wins, it's hard to get buy-in from the rest of the company. So I definitely recommend finding something already standardized that you have a lot of data of across the company, and make that your first hit.
So these have been some technical items. So technical teams can generally address those. But what are some challenges beyond that? Maybe some organizational roadblocks or things that aren't necessarily technical in nature?
Yeah, that's a good one as well. So it goes back to that data governance policy that we talked about earlier. If there's clear ownership of the data, that's going to be a problem, because if there's a central team that's saying we need to get all the data together, but we don't know who owns it, we don't know who to ask, and we don't know what the labels are. Is this confidential data? Is it public domain data? Is it strictly for the C-level group? Then you're going to have a difficult time finding where to put that data, or do we actually want to include it? That is a problem. That could lead obviously to a lack of understanding between the connection of the data quality. If you don't have an owner and you don't have a bona fide resource, or somebody says, I am the expert in that data, then how are you going to know how good the data is? What is its quality as related to business outcomes? So I think the biggest thing is that data governance, starting there. If you don't have a data governance policy in place, maybe that's where you start. Get that in place first. even if it's just a first run, and start getting your databases in the right place, pick ownership and then start. That will definitely help clear, even if the owner is going to say, you know what, I don't know now, give me some time to look at it and I'll get back with you. At least you now have that clear place to go on the data. And so it's really all about the protection in your data governance policy. Who owns what is its label, and what does it do? And that will, having those pre-categorized will help you a lot.
Okay. So in your experience, you've done this quite a number of times and helped guide clients through all these steps. So what's the biggest mistake, or maybe one or two things that you see, whether it's technical, strategic, operational, whatever it may be? What are some of those that you've seen?
Yeah, I'm going to say the first one is that, trying to eat the whole elephant. We start gathering our data and we really do, there's just this common knowledge or misconception, I should say, that, well, if we just put all the data in one spot and we point our agent at it, it'll sort through it and it'll figure it out. And there certainly is a lot of intelligence involved in being able to do that. We've seen what you can do. Put in 15 semi-related documents into some agent and then start asking questions, and it'll start drawing the lines between all those. And it's a certain amount of magic about that. But once again, you might be underestimating the amount of effort it's going to take as to get the data ready. Very often we plan our project and we immediately jump into what are we going to do with the data, when really you need to stop about the data preparation first, because what you have is going to create your whole schedule. Here's data we already have, it's already clean, it's already ready to go. We can use that today versus the next round where we actually need to do a lot of, say, prep and cleaning, versus the last one where we need to structure this data as well as prep it, clean it, and then give it to the AI. Doing that at the beginning and making it a core component of your AI project is going to be important. You start with it and then you move forward. That's definitely one of the biggest mistakes that I see. And then the second, as I said, was let's do this all at once. You should have phases. You should be talking about how you're going to phase in the different pieces. And the more data you have, and the less clearly it is defined, the longer it's going to take. So you want to move that till the end. And I think we all get tempted to say, this is what we want first. We want it to be able to do this. And then we look at the data and we find out that it's not clean, it's not prepared. We've got a lot work to do. Let your data determine what you do in the order you do it.
Okay. So maybe getting a little bit specific. Say we have a company who wants to use a AI model to help predict churn, client churn, customer churn, all those things that are negative to the business. What different approaches, if any, do we need to take for data prep for that than, say, if we were using it for trying to detect fraud?
There are two different sets of data. If you think about that, if you're talking about customer churn, that's really going to be, it's a numbers game, right? You might be looking at values of contracts, terms of contracts. You might be looking at what was bundled in, price versus number of users in the company. So you've got a lot of numbers you can use for that. But there's also going to be a lot of human data in that. It's going to be about your customers. It's going to be about what you know. So there's going to be a certain amount of qualitative data in there as well as quantitative to be able to do a good churn prediction. And so that is, I think, a great option for AI that can do a lot of inference on the documents that you're looking at and what was the tone of that document and how did the tone change over the life of the customer. If you're talking about, say, fraud detection, that's very transactional. So I've got a transaction that occurred, it has a source, a destination, an amount, a date, a time. Maybe those are your data pieces. And then you're going to see that same data over and over again. And it's the same format, the same way, and it's very transactional. And that doesn't have as much to do about the human interactions behind. So one is transactional and one is non in this case. And that is a good way when you're thinking about your different processes. How do I class and group my data into it? And so that's a great way, and I think a great example to look at how you might actually have to categorize your data and use it for different purposes.
Good question here for that, if I could interject real quick before you move on, where some folks are asking around the use cases. So you mentioned the customer churn and some of the business analytics components you can use it for. I know on the Amplify side, there's a lot of post-call like coaching, coach the coach, performance management, CX management that you can do. And then there's the AI agents component of it. And those are three kind of very specific uses that were also highlighted in the opening session. How is the data readiness or the data you use different across those three common scenarios?
I think it's really going to be a lot of different verticals that you run into. Those three are three of them that we run into, but there's also any vertical that you do have, it comes back to identifying that data. We have qualitative data, which is going to be very often data that you get those in surveys. So that's going to be answers to surveys, fill in the box, or give me a rating from 1 to 5, okay? And then there's the quantitative data as well. I think all of these different things that you're going to do and the different pieces that you mentioned are going to be how much of the qualitative. For instance, you mentioned some of the training, and the training that I'm going to do, how effective was that? That's a qualitative question versus I've got X number of dollars for training. How much can I spend that? What worked best in the past? What was the dollar ratio per employee or per student? And those are the questions. So I think knowing those and getting those two pieces, you're going to find some are going to require more qualitative data. And you're going to find, say, the more what we consider data analytics are going to be more that transactional, more quantitative data. So I don't think there's really a difference in the classes that you were talking about. I think it's more the data inside of those. So instead of thinking of them like vertical silos of 3 different use cases, I think you need to thinking about what are the types of data, qualitative, quantitative, and then what do I have and what do I need to fill in?
Okay. So I read an article not too long ago that was talking about AI agents that were talking to other AI agents and the machines were talking to themselves. So just from that standpoint, is it possible to use AI to prep data for AI?
Yeah, certainly. A project that I've done a lot is I end up with a great big database that I know nothing about, which could include a lot of structured data as well as unstructured. And I don't have any idea, and maybe the company doesn't either. So you can use an AI just to even classify that data. You can create groups. One good technique is have the AI say, instead of just saying summarize the data, you could say, here's 9 different classes of data that I have. I want this to be communications, this is technical, this is HR, and so forth. And then you could tell it to categorize your data, just run through and categorize your data into one of those categories, and then give itself a score, say 1 to 5 on how sure it was, 1 low, 5 high. And it will do that. And then you can easily use that to start then tearing into the rest. That's one way to use AI. And then another is, of course, AI is also very good at noticing commonalities through using such things as vectorization. It can then notice the similarities for data. So another pass you could go through is simply say, okay, here's all my different data sources and all the different pieces of data that I have. I would like you to tell me how similar they are to all the others. And it's a lengthy process, but it can then give you actual groups of data that come together. And then on top of that, actually tell you how it grouped them. So it might tell you this is HR data, or here's a whole new set of data, technical documentation you didn't even know you had. And so those are 2 great ways to do that as well as the simple stuff. Show me the variance of this data. What is its standard variance, or how many duplicates do I have? Those are all things that AI can do well.
So maybe looking ahead a little bit, are there emerging technologies or research being done that's going to have a big impact on data preparation for AI platforms?
One of the things you're going to be doing for your data is data augmentation or enrichment. And that's going to be saying, take the data that I have and I need to add additional data that I find somewhere to enrich to make my data worth more to me and have increased its value. And certainly generative AI for data augmentation is very good. It can also, we call that synthetic data. So if you were to go to a generative AI and say, I need to take all of these records and I need to generate additional cases. I have a set of maybe projects in the past that I've gone through, and I want to know the use cases that those projects could be applied to now. So maybe throughout the life of my company, I had some use cases that I no longer support, or those use cases have changed versus some sort of given project. You can have the AI generate data for you and tell you, I'm going to take a look at the way you did do projects, and I'm going to take a look at now of how you're wanting to do projects or how the market has changed, and generate new project information for you. That would be synthetic data. So it's going to automate feature generation for that information. This works very well in engineering tools as well, as you can generate additional synthetic data. And then the enrichment side might be, maybe I have a lot of regional data and I'm in a shipping and I want to know the weather at the time. I want to be able to correlate between the weather and the routes that my trucks were running, but I don't have that. The generative AI could go out there and match you up and find those weather conditions for the various routes, to say the various roads, and maybe you're looking at the delays that you had, or maybe you're looking at just simply the amount of trucks on the road. That is a case where you can enrich that data by bringing in more, and then it will help you with that as well. It can get very sophisticated. There's a lot of very good, sophisticated data quality monitor systems out there that already use some sort of specialized agent to do it.
Okay. So from our poll earlier on this webinar, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was a large majority of those that answered were either our data, we're not sure if it's ready, or we're still trying to investigate it. So kind of given that, for an organization heading down that AI path, what's a piece of advice you would give them regarding data readiness?
Yeah, it goes back to, and I'll tell you the question I think I've got the most is when we start. We actually get brought in for AI projects from day one because people scratching their head a little bit saying, I know I need it, I know it's great, but I know exactly where to start. And I think you have to think about this as hire an employee and more than a tool you bring in. And you wouldn't hire an employee just because they're super qualified in everything, right? You might think, I can use them somewhere, I'm sure I'll find a place for them. But that's not how we do it. We actually find the place first, and then we find the employee. So if you think about AI as a super talented employee, and then say, okay, where would I need help, or where would I hire somebody, or what task am I wanting to solve? Then find the AI or set the AI up to be able to do that. And that is my biggest one, is I think people come in and say, I've got an AI, I'm ready, I've got all the tools, I've got the infrastructure ready to go. Now, what do I do with it? Where do I apply it? And that's going to come back to that data. First thing you really need to know is two things. What are the data that I have in the company? That's going to be very important to even get started. And then what are the pain points, or what are the slowest, or what are the processes that I do the most? So you can then say, I want to automate that process. That's going to save me a lot of time and money. But do I actually have the data to support doing that? And that's going to be key. Because if you don't have the data to back up your process and make it automated, then there's no way to do that. And you need to move on and not worry about it. And I see a lot of people start from the other way and say, I've got the AI, how do I make it work? And they don't have the data. They start trying to make it work with what they think is the data, or maybe they generate some synthetic data, but none of that works. You really need to start from the data first and say, I've got a process I want to automate. What is it going to take? Am I automating work orders, or am I automating packing and shipping, or things like that? Find the data that you need, and then that will help you. We think about designing a lot of times from top down, start at the top of the triangle with a task and break it down to the bottom and solve the problem. But really, we're going to work the other way. We're going to start down at the bottom of the triangle and say, what do I have available to me to give this super intelligent employee a way to solve the problem? So you go from the bottom up. And I think that's the biggest challenge that people run into, is that bottom up approach. Start at the data and work your way to the top instead of the other way around.
Okay. Preparation is absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. Okay. Before we turn it back over to Scott and say thanks again for everybody's time, could the audience go to learn more about best practices, data preparation and stuff once we're done with this webinar?
My first answer is ask your AI. And I say that tongue in cheek, right? But I'm sure it will have a good answer for you. If you start looking, it's an absolutely blooming industry right now. If you just do a quick search, you're going to find a lot of companies that will help you out. And they all have a generalist practice as well as specialists. I don't have a great answer for you exactly where to go, except that there are technology advisors that can help you with that. And certainly we are one of those. Our host as well, our sponsor here, does a lot of work in data. And so finding something like that and being able to start is probably your best bet. I don't have one good answer for everybody. I've seen several people that produce the AI data book that you can get. Generally, that is produced by somebody that has their own practice, and so that will be biased toward their practice. But maybe that's coming. That's something that we do need, is a roadmap for that.
Gotcha. Thanks. I was hoping you were going to share your home phone number as an answer to that question, but I get it. Just kidding. Again, thanks everybody. Scott, I'll turn it over to you. I think you've got another poll for us.
Yeah, just to close it out, how are you planning on using your data now that you've heard a little bit about how the AI models are affected by AI and how the structure is super important? It seems like we have the leader potentially being training an AI model, which I think is, of course, what we all want to do. As we get this going, I'll just given the answers that are coming in, how long should we expect AI to understand our business and the purpose of it for that training period? Because it's always ongoing to start to get some real results.
Yeah, so if you're asking like how long does a training session take before your model is able to do something that's a little bit better than the open source or the open AI, I'm sorry, model?
The
Yeah.
foundation model, that really is going to depend on the amount of data you have and the size of the model. We have the gigantuous models out there that we're familiar with, Gemini and OpenAI and all those guys, Claudes and Perplexity, that are in the hundreds of billions of parameters. And in fact, I saw a model the other day. It was the first trillion parameter model that I saw. And so those take a while to train. There's some ways around that. There's adapters you can create called, for instance, LoRa or QLoRa, or a way that you train a smaller model and kind of bolt it on. I think most people would go that way. Another option that you have is you can train a smaller model. You can start with a much smaller foundation. If you think about those big models, their goal is to put as much data in them as they can. They're hoping to replace a search engine with it. So if you ask it a question, it will know a lot about the topic that you are, or in some cases, maybe a little. But the goal is a lot of data, maybe a little about everything in the world. And they're good at that. They're very large. Some of the smaller are more focused on language, or they're focused, say, on the medical industry directly, or they're focused on engineering or structural architectural work. And so they are specialists. And even just a simple, smaller foundation model, maybe around 32 billion to 70 billion parameters, is what most companies can use. They can do inference, they can summarize, they can read documents, they can do all of that. And then when it comes time to actually do the fine tuning, since they're so much smaller, you're not opening up 405 billion parameters. You're only opening up 28 to 32 billion to do that. And so they can actually run much quicker. I've done some small models myself in the 4 billion and on my own host game GPU at home. It's very possible. I think if you're wanting to do the training a model, you definitely are going to need some advisement on the way to do that based on the amount of data and what it is you're trying to do. You can go anywhere from like a vector database where you just vectorize all of your documents and we do a RAG type retrieval augmented generation, depending on how much data you have. Or if you really want to embed it directly into the LLM and basically have it be a part of the LLM's ecosphere about how it thinks, then you're probably going to end up fine tuning a smaller model. That would be my recommendation. And then how long does it take? That really does depend on that. I've done some small models in, say, a 48-hour run on a reasonably good GPU. I've also done some fairly larger models, say around maybe a 60 billion parameter model on a couple of H100s. Those are the top tier GPUs that took maybe 4 or 5 weeks, just depending on how much data you were wanting to put in there. It really does vary. No one single answer there.
And I know that this has come up in a few different sessions where you probably talked about it in more detail on that smaller model. With so many AI vendors out there, someone asked, could OpenAI just do anything and everything you wanted? Do you even have to use any other model? And I think that's where starting with someone who has a specific use case already geared and modeled and proven and tested in how to train it a little bit more strategically towards your use case, that's where it really boils down to, okay, is this software vendor or AI model vendor able to do what I need it to do in order to get the results and accomplish the business outcomes that you're looking for? And on the AI ready data side, one of the things that we focus on is actually getting that data. So if you're in that in-between stage, using someone like Cloud Communications Group to pinpoint who it is that you should be shortlisting to be able to get that quick 1 to 2 quarter results on impact is important. And then making sure that vendor does a motion similar to ours where we have a data scientist team that's part of the implementation team and a data scientist team that is connected to the customer success team to make sure that you're always prepared in a way that we're bringing the data together in the specific way with the right structure, with the right framework to get you to that goal so that you're not having to just do this on yourself and they'll help you with the dashboard, but we actually take that next step in getting you that dataness or that data in a ready format. One of the things that always comes up, and I'll ask you this, we don't just pull that data in, we make sure that there's mechanisms to always refresh it. And we find that's obviously the most important. So you don't have to go through these huge exercises every time. Is there something you can do on your side or as a customer, or something that data teams in these companies can do to make sure that they have some form of refresh, and how often should that be refreshed?
You're onto something good there for sure. I think that's a very important point that you made, that this is not a one-time thing. You're not just going to collect your data, you're going to train an AI or create a vector database and be done. You're going to have new data, and you're going to want that data to be updated as well. So I think it's a very important point that you mentioned, that this is going to need to be a repeatable process. I probably am going to need some automated way to gather that data. And if I don't have that, at least if I know where it is and I've been through the process and I'm now collecting it differently to make this easier, I'm going to want to update that. To me, if you're in a transactional system and you're doing a lot of transactions, you may be looking at updating, say, on a quarterly basis. If you are more qualitative and you're doing more along, say, sales data, things like that, you're probably going to do it less. In that case, it may be something like every 9 months to every year. If you're doing engineering and your engineering is moving quickly, such as software development, those things, you're going to be somewhere in between. As I mentioned, engineering, a lot of people are wanting to put their code in an AI. It helps the coders. In fact, AI does a lot of coding now. But if you're going to put your code out in a public model, you have to be careful with that. And so that's yet another reason why you may want to consider a smaller model and going private, so that you're not putting your information out there. For instance, medical teams can't. They can't necessarily just put their data out and still be HIPAA compliant. So I think all of those pieces, where your AI is, how big it is, and how much data you want, are going to determine how often you're going to end up refreshing it.
And oftentimes our data scientists and engineers are saying in meetings, we try to get it to be a weekly refresh when it comes to customer experience data, because things can change so quickly, especially with ebbs and flows of peak seasons and things like that, where you have big bursts of 1 month of just high levels of transactions. If you have a flower organization like 1-800-Flowers, Mother's Day is a huge spike. You need triple the amount of agents during that time frame. So those things are definitely important. And I know that our team strives to get that data refreshed as much as possible. One thing that I also want to bring up, though it wasn't a question, I'll just ask it, is on the compliance component of it. I'd love to get your point of view on when you do have that PII, that HIPAA, or other types of data security concerns, how can you maybe hedge your bets to stay ahead of the game as you start to go through this process of implementing AI solutions?
Yeah, I think the key is the actual compliance you need to meet. There are obviously different levels of compliance that require. Some of them you can't even use a public cloud. And you have to think that I'm going to be putting my data not only in a public cloud, but I'm going to put it in a public cloud that learns from the data itself. That's a grave concern for a lot of compliance, obviously, itself. Now, one thing you can do is a lot of the enterprise models for the big services will say, we're not actually training our model on your data. That comes at a premium. It costs you a lot more, but that's one key. Second, there's another model where somebody might sit, say, between you and the big models, and they're a wall. And so you actually ask it your questions, and then they go on the backside and ask the big models on your behalf. You stay anonymous that way, and they're the ones paying that premium fee, so the data is not used for learning. You can think that is a shared cost model. Those are starting to pop up. And then ultimately, the last piece of that compliance piece is do your own model. And do you do it in your private cloud, or do you do it on your on-prem? Depending on the compliance you're after, you're going to follow into one of those is logging. You're going to need to be able to keep track of how the AI was used, the prompts that was asked, the data that it looked at, and everything that it touched, and the answers that came back. That's going to be very important for any one of these compliances.
On that line, if I may, do I remember reading something recently where I think it was Meta had done some research and some work where they actually showed that a smaller model was more accurate and more efficient than the larger models out there. Do I remember that correctly? So with those smaller ones, it's a lot more, the companies could put those on their own equipment a lot more scalable than they are.
A lot of times what we're doing to generate the small models, and you got to realize that the companies that are generating these are Google and Meta and IBM and research firms across the country and across the world. They're actually generating these small models. And very often what they're doing is they're called a process of distilling. So they take a large model and they ask it questions in a different way. Instead of saying, I want one answer, I want a bunch of answers, and you tell me what you think is the best and grade them for me. And then when you do that, you can take a smaller model and you can use that distilled data to get more information in a smaller model. I look at it like I did a lot of neuroscience work for my master's degree, and I was just fascinated by how the brain is organized and how it works. And we don't even understand it that yet. But one thing we found out for sure in the neuroscience work is we have a lot of kind of junk neurons or junk memory. We retain a lot of data that we don't need. We can remember things from our childhood that just make no sense to why do I remember that? But we do because it's attached to some emotion. But so if you think about a big model being that way, I learned all this data. I was trained on trillions and trillions of tokens to be able to learn everything I know. But in reality, 30% of it is all you'll ever need. And so that's what they do with a smaller model is they use that distilling process to get to just the core. So instead of saying, I know 1,000 things about the latest and greatest blockbuster movie, I only know the 10 that everybody asks. So that's why smaller models can be a lot more accurate in that case.
I'll just add something to going back to the compliance piece as well. You mentioned having something on-prem or even a hybrid solution to stay compliant with that, working with a credit card company that we have and actually saying, okay, if some of this data can't go to the cloud and cross-country borders or whatever it is, actually installing a processor or a server in their own stack that does the analysis there. And so you go back to the old hybrid model instead of just moving completely to the cloud to make sure that you still can get the power of the AI models, but then able to check the box for your CISO and others.
Yeah, and I think the point there is people think, well, gosh, how would I run these things? They take data centers, right? We're reading about the data center in Tennessee that needs 45 different diesel generators to run. You don't need that. That's if you're running very large models for thousands of people, but smaller models don't require that. You can actually have a couple of mid-sized GPUs do a lot of work for a large company. And if you have a lot of users, you might need one or two of the high ends. And you can rent these, you can rent time on them, and you can get them a lot cheaper than if you're going to buy them yourself. There's all kinds of ways you can achieve that, but it doesn't take gigantic data center and the Mojave to do this.
So we'll end there. And I think when you say models, a lot of that we may be confused. We're CX leaders, and it's really just finding that solution that is pointed enough and trained enough already to provide the outcomes that you're looking for in your business and in your customer's experience and journey. And so that's where Cloud Communications Group can come in and help you be prepared, find the right vendor, and very quickly, probably faster than you think, get those outcomes that you're looking for. So with that, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chris, for sharing all that information. Again, we'll have the recording to this and some others to be able to have you reference this so you don't have to save the notes that you made just now. And everyone have a great day, and we will see you at the next event.